Ladies and gentlemen, for the next episode of the Beginner's Mind Show, we have with us a global authority on the subject of values. She's been working with companies, institutions, and individuals across the world, Dr. Mandeep Rai Simerjeet. She has traveled to more than 150 countries and reported as a journalist for the BBC World Service and Reuters, among others. And out of the 150, she picked 101 and put together an amazing book called The Values Compass: What 101 Countries Teach Us About Purpose, Life, and Leadership. The book made it to the list of the highly commended business book of the year in the DEI category, and Thinkers 50 has listed Dr. Mandeep as 2021's top thinker to watch. She began her career in private banking at JP Morgan and later worked for the UN, the European Commission, and grassroots NGOs before setting up the UAE's first media venture capital fund. Dr. Mandeep has an MSc in International Development from the London School of Economics and completed an MBA at London Business School with a year at Harvard and MIT. She also holds a PhD in Global Values. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our special guest today, Dr. Mandeep Rai Simerjeet. Hey, you're welcome to the show. Sat Sri Akal.
Sat Sri Akal ji.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for taking out the time. I know it's early in the UK at this point of time, really early in the morning. We appreciate you saying yes to this and having this conversation today. So 150 countries, top thinker, business book of the year, global authority on values, MSc, MBA, doctorate. What's your drive and motivation, Dr. Mandeep, that has sustained you, that has kept you going over the years?
Well, I could tell you that 150 has now become 185 during the pandemic. I know it was actually much easier to travel during the pandemic than
really?
Well, right now, as you know, everybody's wanting to get on a flight. Everybody's wanting to travel like crazy, which I don't think is great for the environment or great for us. And I think we learned a lot during the pandemic. But one thing that was possible was that the demand wasn't there to go, to go onto a flight or to travel. Which made travel actually easier.
Right.
You asked what's the drive?
Because those are stellar accomplishments.
It's many fold.
Okay.
Yeah. One, I would say, as a Punjabi female, you are told in your scriptures and in your faith that there's no difference between men and women, and that whatever is possible for a man is possible for a woman. And we definitely see that in the way that the scriptures are written, but we also see it in, I saw it a lot in terms of the sakya my parents would share with me.
Right.
And then culturally, I found that actually there was a difference. Culturally, it seemed that women were being, or girls are being raised to get married to a good guy and to very Jane Austen kind of, to make sure that they're going to create a secure and happy household and happy children, and to think of the next generation.
That was the script you were expected to follow, right? Be a good Punjabi girl. You had a certain script, right?
A little, yes. And so I almost feel that you are raised as equals. Like, so during your school days, you are definitely equal. And for example, with my husband, we had the same grades at GCSE, the same grades at A-level. We both were admitted to Oxford. We both went for a similar job at Reuters. We both, we were very much equal until really, I think, until we actually got married, and then definitely when you have children. But why should it be the case that you're both parents? You should actually be equal all the way through. So I think the drive has been partly that, to try and, you can't have everything at the same time, but you can have everything over time. So to slowly chip away at things. So there was this moment when I got the place at Oxford where my mum said, "Oh, then you're going to be like, who's going to marry you if you go there?"
Right.
As in, a little bit kind of like, don't become too educated. A little, I think was her thought. The other thing it was that she also thought I'd marry some white guy called Sebastian, that she'd lose me from the family or the community. And so, and then she heard that there was a lot of pressure there were drugs, all kinds of things I think went through her head as a mother. And I heard her fears and heard that she really wanted what was the best for me, which in her mind was stability, security, a good family life.
Right.
She really wanted she wanted to make sure I had a happy, successful future. I also wanted what was best for me, but my values were more about learning as much as possible, living as much as possible, seeing as much as possible, and really understanding the way the world worked. So I wanted to study politics, economics, and philosophy. And I decided to do what she asked, which was to choose. She said, "Well, choose any other university, just don't go to Oxford or Cambridge. Just keep it a little bit normal." And I did that. But afterwards, I realized that actually, although we both wanted what was best for me, what the definition of that was a bit different, and the values behind it were a bit different. So once I realized that for me, I'd made a little bit of a mistake at that point, I didn't want to make that mistake again. So after that, I went for the highest academic achievements I could get. I worked as hard as I could get. I traveled as far as I could go. I didn't let anything stop me, because I think I had let someone stop me, when I was young, and I learned from that. So that's been a big driving force. So I'm very grateful to my mum.
Wow. No, that's a great, inspiring story there. And I think my number one takeaway there is to learn from our own mistakes. I mean, as we reflect back on our own journey, there are times when we don't raise the bar, when we're satisfied with what we get. And then because of cultural conditioning or social conditioning or so many factors around us, we don't think big, I think. So this is the first message out there for our audience today. Type that in the comment section, please. Let that be your first affirmation, first takeaway for the day. I commit to thinking big, because that's where it all begins, right? It all begins with this vision in your head, with this dreams, and then you take action, and then you fill up the application forms, and then you sit for the tests, and you do so many other things. It all happens afterwards. The first is give yourself permission to dream big. It doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is. Permit yourself to think big, and that's very inspiring story there. I'm interested now about the travel part. Of course, your job took you to what was then 150 countries, now 185. Tell us about how did travel transform your worldview? What impact did this exposure to multiple cultures, languages, habits, religions, ways of living, working, etc. What impact did this have to you? And the next one, I'm going to come to your book. How did this move on to your book? But let's talk about travel first. How did that shape you into a better person, Dr. Mandeep?
Okay, so firstly, this was the product. It's the Values Compass.
All right. Okay.
What 101 countries teach us about purpose, life, and leadership. And if you look into the book, into the contents page, for example, you will see that it takes you to all those countries and then defines each and every country into a different value. And so, to answer your question, your first question was, how did it shape me? Well, my son has just come back from his first trip ever independent of us. He just went to France with school. And I vividly remember, he's 10. I vividly remember being his age. I think it's like almost a rite of passage that in Britain, you go on your first trip just at the end of your primary school, beginning of your secondary school, on this one trip to France. Like every student, I think, does that trip. And for me, I can tell you, even today, every minute of every day, every minute of those 3 days is etched into my brain. And when he came back just now, he's called Narayan. When Narayan came back, he could tell me everything, He was like, for the first time when we sat in the car, he said, "No, Mama, don't put the music on. I need to talk to you. I need to tell you all the..." And I've never, in all the times we sit in the car, he's never said that. And I could tell that he was bubbling with, and this happened, and then we saw this, and then we did this. And this is what happens when you go away especially when you go away alone or you go away independent of your security blanket, of your family, independent. And so I'm sure it's the same for you. There are times when you've been away and you can tell me what you smelt, tell me who said what your experience was, and it's like you could live 100 days in your normal life and you can't remember what you did yesterday, and you don't really know what you're doing tomorrow, and you can't remember last week, but you can definitely remember those trips. So as the more I kind of traveled, I would write. I'm a reporter, so I would have I would do a TV broadcast or a radio broadcast. With the World Service, it was a lot for radio. With the UN, with Reuters, etc., it was a lot for television. But I would always write back a kind of a personal email to my friends and family, something that said something along the lines of, "This is what Japan is really like," or "This is, this is the reason you should go to Japan," for example. And these emails, I would send it to my friends and family, but then people would send it on to like their friends and their friends' friends and their friends. And before I knew it, people that I didn't know would write back to me and say, one day you should turn this into a book.
Right.
And I think what happened was that in those emails, I had contained like either a lesson or an impression or something that had truly moved me. So your question was, how did each and every place shape you? I think that each and every place, my parents always taught me, look for the best in people. Look at what a person can teach you, rather than, have everything. Everything should make you grow.
Right.
And so I just extended that to every experience should make you grow. Every place should make you go. Every trip should make you grow also. And I would just summarize what is the growth of each and every place. And that's really then what's in the book. It's like wisdom from around the world, essentially.
Wow. That's fantastic. And I completely agree with the fact that travel sort of puts you into this heightened state of alertness and awareness, right? You can smell certain things for the first time, see certain things for the first time, and you're just taking it all in. And you're a better person because of that. I remember one of my first trips to the Middle East or different parts of the Middle East, and you go to the shopping malls, and you can smell the bakur that they light in the air, and it has this traditional Arabic sort of smell there, and you can immediately, so you're in that heightened state of alertness, and it changes you because you're absorbing it in. You're like a sponge. And as far as promoting diversity, inclusion, and all these other things, creating more empathy, I think travel has a huge role to play, because you're experiencing it firsthand rather than from an academic point of view. For example, you could read about what's happening in India today, or from media, from newspapers or website or Facebook, but that's controlled by the algorithms, remember? That's controlled by the algorithms, which run these softwares. So you might not get the real picture. It's only until you come there and you experience it firsthand, you have a deeper, richer understanding of what's really going on. I'm curious, how did those travels, and you learned a lot, and the entire process of your development there, but how did that translate into picking one value per country? I believe that's how your book is laid out, right? You pick a country, and then you have one value listed for it. Can you give us an example of country value? I'd love to hear what you had about India, of course, and then how did this transpire? How did you come up with this idea of country value? How did you connect leadership with travel? Because that's different. That's intriguing.
So I think what you were smelling in the Middle East is probably oud. That really
bakur,
strong kind of, So oud is something that if I smell it, exactly, it takes you straight back there. Your question was how did I find one value per country? So for example, India, you asked about India, it's faith.
Faith.
Faith. Like even when you get into a rickshaw, like all the gods will be present, right? Not just Krishna or Ram, but Guru Nanak and Jesus and Prophet Muhammad. Like everyone will be there just in case. And it's good, because otherwise you wouldn't get into that rickshaw, given how you put your life in your hands sometimes.
And also the faith, that's beautiful. Also the faith that the business transaction, is like no down payment there. There is like this unspoken sort of bond that you've taken a rickshaw ride and you are going to pay up, and people don't ask too many questions. There's this the faith not only in the religious sense, but also faith in how people live and work, right? That's beautiful.
Exactly. And that's why so many people hit from the West. Like I live 1 block away from the Beatles studio. All the Beatles and everyone, came to India to find their spirituality and faith.
True.
It's known throughout the world for that. Yeah, exactly. But then there's also the fact that really nothing moves without this sense of consulting one's faith. Like when you name your child, I named my children. I'm, Punjabi, Sikh, Indian, and I went to the Gurbani first and took an akkar, and so my child is named after with N, Nanna. But then there's a day for puja. There's a day where if you're working on a computer, or if you're working with an iron, or if you're working with a washing machine, whatever there's a day that you give thanks to that.
Puja,
like
right.
you praise that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Vishkarma day.
Exactly. But everything, like from the way you get married to what job you might take, to how you start that job, to how you die, every single
Buying
point
a
in
new
your
car.
life is it's dictated a little bit by
lemons
your faith.
and chilies.
Exactly.
And right.
Which you don't see as much in any other part of the world. Like India was almost synonymous with spirituality and faith.
Right.
So it's obvious. But similarly, if I took you to Japan, which I mentioned before, there it's like respect permeates every part of their society. Like from the way that the young children are taught to take off their rainy outdoor shoes, put on their indoor shoes, fold their umbrella in a certain way so that the water doesn't drip all over the floor. After lunch, the children will clean up their kindergarten space because you have to be respectful that someone else will walk through here barefooted or someone. And so that kind of sensibility or respect you then see in those children, in those adults, like even the way they will respect one another as they get file onto the train, or as they fold their newspaper, or as they speak to one another, or bow to one another, or how they refer to one another. And so it's almost like respect is in every part of that, every strata of that society. They've chosen it as their number one value. In other places, like in Bulgaria, it's health. Where other parts of the world, like here, we talk about weather as a small talk. In Bulgaria, they cut all of that small talk. They're like, which cough recipe is working? What are you using for your grandmother? Or how are you dealing with your backache? Like everything is much more to do with.
That's the value in my home, Dr. Mandeep, because my mom's always talking about that. I'm always joking with her that you should write a book on home recipes, right? 101 traditional recipes to take care of everything, or different kinds of chai for all different sorts of ailments. I
look forward to that. I think we need it. We even have COVID chai, right? We have the COVID chai, so we need to hear it.
Sure. So Japan and respect, right? And Bulgaria health.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can just see it everywhere you go. You can see that. I believe that society and people want to evolve into a better version of themselves each and every day. That we're always constantly trying to, as you said, positive affirmations. You're always thinking, how can I be better? Well, society is made out of people. It's the same. But different societies have chosen different metrics or frameworks to be better. So, for example, with America, you see more that it's a land of immigrants, and that really through its history, its geography, how it came about, it has much more of an entrepreneurial spirit.
Pioneers.
Whereas, exactly. Whereas Portugal, because of where it's situated in the peninsula, because of how it looks out, it's had much more exploration, has been kind of almost its DNA or its reason to be. So every society, because of where it's positioned, because of the weather systems, because of the historical, sociological, psychological makeup and psyche, has evolved slightly differently. And I just tuned into what that is. My aim was not to stereotype a place with one word or one value. My aim was for the book to take you through different values and help you think, well, what would it mean if my life had more respect? Or what would it mean if I were to put health as number one, which we saw during the pandemic? Suddenly the world put health as number one. Or how would my life change if excellence was true, if I was truly driven by excellence?
Is that Germany, by the way?
One value.
Excellence, Germany?
No.
Okay.
Germany is introspection.
Oh, really?
They're
Okay.
willing to, yeah, yeah. So, the aim was for you as an individual to boil down to your top 5 values, and
Okay.
more importantly, to prioritize those,
Right.
and to have a number one that's key and most important, and then 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you do this, as the Dalai Lama wrote about the book, it leads to better decision making and therefore greater fulfillment, success, and happiness.
Indeed.
It just brings great clarity and harmony to your mind.
Absolutely. And that there's you're able to, win over several internal conflicts because you know where you stand, right? It's not like you have something, you have to figure it out every single time. I remember one of Dr. Stephen Covey's words on quotes on this subject. He said, decision making becomes easier when you know what your values are. And I've used that in several of my leadership training programs because I'm just asking people, show of hands, how many vegetarians out there, right? Or people who've been vegetarian all their lives. And I just ask them, look, if you're out having dinner and there's a buffet and it's got some very nice non-vegetarian preparations from across the world, do you have an internal battle that, should I try this? Should I try that? And it's an absolute no. It's certain I'm going to look for vegetarian food or find a way to arrange it, right? There's no conflict whatsoever because that clarity about who I am, what I stand for, what my value is, that decision was taken long, long ago. And it's amazing how you've distilled such complex cultures into maybe a distinct value that we can all learn from. And as you rightly said, not with the intent to stereotype or oversimplify it, but with the intent to learn from each other. And what would it mean for somebody who's born and raised in a faith-based culture like India to have a more entrepreneurial drive? And I think that's happening because of, this borderless world that we're living in, because people go and work and study and live in different parts of the world and they move back and it's a world without borders. So now we have all of these values, bits and pieces permeating everywhere. And that's amazing how we can learn from each other, how we can recognize, but most importantly, first recognize who we are, what we stand for. So is there, because I took the Gallup Strength Finder test, and there's that online thing, you answer a set of questions, you get what your top 5 strengths are, right? Of course, I don't know if they have speaking listed as one of them or not, but I enjoyed taking that test 5 years ago because it was speaking to me. The results were, it was like, here's something that's held in very high esteem by the, psychological or corporate world, and they're giving me this information about me. So wonderful. I'm very happy to see that. How do you suggest one should go about narrowing down on one's values and having more clarity about what my values are as an individual?
So a few thoughts went through my head as you were talking. Firstly, the vegetarianism, like you said, that when Narayan, even in his trip, they were offered snails and they were offered frogs. And even the marshmallows had gelatine and, fragments of kind of bone. And it was really good that even as a 10-year-old, he was like, I knew this is no, 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 and what's yes.
Oh, wow.
So I think that knowing helps, it really simplifies your life, but also brings a greater strength. So that clarity is really powerful. And then Gallup, I can just tell that you're likely to be a woo or an influencer. And I am working on actually creating a values
nice.
assessment. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So it's funny that you should mention that.
Well.
But before we get there, this book actually enables you to get to your top values even now. And actually it's quite, there's like a process. That's how the book is written. It's a very simple read. Each value is just a page or two. But what's much more important is the introduction and the conclusion, which takes you through the process.
Okay.
And I also have these values cards that help you. So if you want, feel free to reach out to me and we can create further there.
Sure.
It's kind of gamifying values or helping you find them. But
I think it's great service to humanity, especially youngsters. As you mentioned about your son having his clarity about his food preferences, and because a lot of us, we spend half of our life making all these mistakes, and some of those mistakes we can never undo. until we arrive at some decent conclusion about who we are, what resonates with me, what doesn't. And by then, the damage is already done. It's hard to undo it. It's a great service, I believe, especially for youngsters. And a lot of our audience, Dr. Mandeep, happen to be young people across the world, not only just in the Indian subcontinent, but across the world. And I think I highly recommend for all of you guys to get your hands on this book and go through the process that Dr. Mandeep is mentioning, the introduction, figuring out your values and shortlisting that. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I find that when we do that, whether we're making the micro decisions of what our morning looks like or what our day looks like, or whether we're making bigger decisions like which subjects do we choose, or which degree are we going to do, or which university, or who we're going to marry, or where we're going to work, the micro and macro decisions that make up your life, if you're making them according to your values and what really matters to you, not what matters to your peers or your friends or your school or your parents or social media or the people around you, but what actually makes you tick. Your life is already being almost written by the legacy that you actually want to leave. And I can't even begin to tell you the power, the transformational power that this work has, both in your life, but also in groups, in organizations, in institutions. We've seen that companies can work much more effectively because of it. They communicate better, they attract talent better.
Sure.
And they're able to really resonate their service or their product with the world on a much higher frequency.
Absolutely, because it's not about money anymore. It's not about, for the generations that are now coming into our workforce, it's not about money, it's about meaning. And leaders don't just have to be providers of products and services or leading departments, they have to be meaning makers. I urge every leader to consider that role, donning the hat of a meaning maker. Can you help your people make sense of why you're doing what you're doing together on a daily basis, how their role fits into that? And that's where all of this comes in, creating a culture which is conscious of their corporate values. I'm going to ask a question which might be slightly controversial. And Samuel P. Huntington, Clash of Civilizations. Is the Clash of Civilizations also a clash of values? Are they correlated?
Partly, yes.
Okay.
I remember that book very well. I think that if you want to create harmony, you look at values, but a lot of Clash of Civilizations, or generally clash, is based around what divides us, what's different about us, how can we, and actually that's really what politics looks at a lot too, what's the difference, whereas values actually unite. So beliefs, thinking that you have a certain belief, thinking another has a certain belief divides, but values, knowing why, knowing the underlying, the fact that we actually all have very similar needs, that unites. For example, with Democrats and Republicans, when we did a huge study across the states, and we found out that actually 9 of their top 10 values were very similar. And around the world, what we want, what we want for our children, what we want for ourselves, what we want for our parents, the life we want to, we all actually have very similar needs and therefore very similar values. It's just our interpretation of them or our belief around them makes you potentially makes people very dogmatic and think that they need to. Right now, the world feels so polarized, right? You're either extreme right or extreme left. It doesn't seem like there's a nice, but yet the truth is that we're much more similar and that there's this nice, steady middle ground. And when you're able to understand the values of another, you're really able to get there. And you're also able to speak the language that they're more likely to understand.
I think, as you rightly said, the key is to be able to understand why this is the dominant value, how it has come to be the dominant value for that particular culture, to appreciate it, to understand it, and then learn from it and see and not impose your worldview on other people. I think that is really one of the reasons why these conflicts begin, is because I look at the world in a certain way, and it's worked well for me so far. And now I expect that everybody else, despite having figured out their own ways, which might be better than mine, but I expect that they should follow mine because, hey, you know what? The entire movie industry talks about my way of doing things, so that should be the right way of doing things. Or the entire current literature or all conversations are around our way of doing things, so that's how it should be. But there are more and more cultures which are now getting more assertive about, discovering their heritage and saying, oh, we too have a different way of doing things, and it might differ from what yours, but it's worked well for us and would like to stick to it. And I think mutual understanding, mutual appreciation might help change things for the better.
Well, it's a little like how you mentioned. So the book became an international bestseller, which meant that it kind of hit the bestseller lists in different parts of the world, and it's been translated into many different languages. And it was chosen as almost like the guide to the Olympics. And I think this was in Tokyo 2020. And I think the reason for that is because it had something positive to say about each and every country and culture. But to your point about the difference and the diversity, you need all the colors in the rainbow to create diversity. You need to really understand the whole spectrum, the whole gamut. And it's not as difficult as we think. To appreciate another, it's like to appreciate yourself. It's almost like all you're practicing is self-love.
Sure.
And although it can seem difficult, actually to switch into that is as simple as really making a choice. So what this book or work does is it helps you, rather than you being a reactive machine all the time, reacting to things the way you always have done because your worldview is a certain way. It helps you actively sit back and choose, like gives you a little bit of space between the moment that the incident occurs and your response to choose according to like the thinking that you have done in the foreground, so that in the background, so that the foreground runs smoother. So almost like giving time to examine your software in your brain.
That's self-reflection. Sure.
Yes, but not in a heavy, deep way, but in a very kind of easy, structured way.
Right. I think it is to remain in touch with one's curiosity about the world and about yourself. The curiosity, the spark that we all have as little kids. To find out, hey, how do things work in a different part of the world, and different facets about my own personality. Am I good at athletics? What am I good at? And that exploration should not cease. My next question is going to be about the corporate world. Business leaders have a tough time reconciling the talk about values and having manuals and orientation programs and giving pep talks about follow your values, and it happens all the time, and then finding out in the world of business it's a bottom line that determines a lot of decisions in the long run. What are your thoughts on business leaders with good intentions who want to create value conscious cultures? How do they go about this? Is there a process? And especially when confronted with a choice between standing up for your values or adding value to stakeholders and shareholders, how to mitigate, how to sort of walk that thin line?
So to go, firstly, I just wanted to address the idea of values becoming habits.
Okay.
So once you have... just to finish, I just want to finish that circle of, once I spoke about your values being your software, once your actions start to perform in accordance to your values, they become habits. And so even though it can look like this is a young person thing and you might have curiosity while you're young, having curiosity or being open to forming those good new habits, no matter what age you are, means that you can almost reshuffle that deck of values-based cards. So let's say, for example, health is your number one.
Okay.
Once your morning or your day does incorporate, I don't know, that you might wake up and have nimble bani instead of chai. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying, or you might get up and do some exercise or yoga or stretching or running or something, so that it's a fundamental part of your day, so that you've almost changed your metabolism before your day's eating and drinking and whatever starts. Then it's become a habit. It's not like you have to have health as your number one for the rest of your life. It's already your number one because you've already made it into a habit. It's how you start your morning. And then you can think about, all right, what else is important to me now? So to your question about, it was about corporate
leaders,
and how, corporate leaders. So I have found during the pandemic, actually, that there have been many corporate leaders who have had very values-based leadership that have been truly successful of fulfilling that or pushing that through. For example, MasterCard, through Ajay Banga, but also through the foundation and other parts, have thought, we're going to commit to Africa. We're going to commit to the bottom of the pyramid. We're going to make sure that all of our employees have time to volunteer and to give. We're going to make sure that purpose is leading our way forward, not just, as you said, not just shareholder profit, but to think about all the stakeholders that are involved, the whole supply chain, consumers. It's almost as if the foundation of this work actually began with an oath, like the way you take an oath in the legal profession, and you say that you are going to stand by the letter of the law, or the way you take an oath in the medical profession, and you say that you stand by what's good for the patient rather than your own gain. Equally in business, you take an oath to say that you stand for all the stakeholders that are part of this, that are being affected by this service or product that you're creating, rather than just the shareholders. That you stand for a certain number of values. And when you're coming at your work from that type of a standpoint, then you find that the way you're able to operate has a much greater integrity. And actually is, again, much more fulfilling to you, and to the other, it's much more, it's something that employees will happily walk into the door and serve with 200% of themselves, rather than thinking it's just for a little bit of extra profit before my boss.
It's great internal motivation. It's great internal motivation, knowing that you're part of a project, you're being led by a leader who's conscious of, the environment and those who are left behind. You're part of something bigger than yourself. I'd like to dwell on a couple of things that you said before we go further. Clarity. I think that's emerged twice in our conversation thus far. You talked about clarity for the self, clarity for corporate values. I think that could be our second affirmation, second major takeaway, guys, in this conversation. Type that in the chat box next. Clarity is my superpower. I will make clarity my superpower. And of course, in a world that is flooded with information on social media that wants you to be someone else for popularity and likes and so many other things, clarity about who you are and unapologetically being yourself is that is a superpower. And that leads me to my next question, to the segment of our population which are the most vulnerable across the world, young people with access to devices which are as addictive as cocaine and nicotine. It's freely available to them, all these things, and the desire feeding into their desire to be popular and to fit in with the rest of the crowd, they might go astray, and many of them are. What would your words of guidance and inspiration be to young people here in India, Dr. Mandeep, and across the world on discovering their values?
Well, we've just spoken about algorithms you mentioned algorithms, and you mentioned how essentially social media is very successful at taking you down a rabbit hole. You might very quickly, you might be searching one thing, and it will just give you more evidence reaffirming that one particular worldview again and again and again. And we have to be so mindful of that, because it's actually almost like isolating you from what we're talking about, from the diversity, from the myriad of different ways. I would say one thing, to challenge yourself, even with social media, challenge yourself and give me the reasons why you shouldn't have it. And that's what we should do with everything, right? Be able to stand on both sides of the spectrum and be able to talk about both sides successfully and argue both sides successfully. And give yourself, the people in Silicon Valley, the experts with this, with these devices, don't give their children their devices.
Yeah.
They deliberately will take detox days or detox weekends or detox weeks.
While they give
Why?
the rest
Because
of us.
they know the addictive. Exactly. So let's learn from that and not allow ourselves to be kidnapped. Essentially.
Yeah. That's great advice there for young people across the world. Don't let this technology hijack you and kidnap you. You are the masters and the technology is your slave. Don't let it be the other way around. Dr. Mandeep Rai, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here today. And we will have you back for another conversation because there's so many other things we want to talk to you about. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I feel as though there's so much wisdom we need to explore together, and but for the moment, may the values compass be a part of your toolkit and your toolkit as you move into, give yourself the space and time just to reflect for a moment with your values, and you will see and report back to me how your life clears up. You can find me on every form of social media, and sure. I'd love to hear from you.
And you'll have the links in the description below for Dr. Mandeep Rai's social media handles, and go connect with her. And I would highly recommend you purchase that book and go through the process there to explore what your top values are. Thank you once again for your time.
It doesn't take long, but it's worth doing.
I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.